See this little guy right here? This is a baby tomato, not metaphorically, literally. This sucker you've been taught to rip off your plant since the day you started gardening. This thing was going to grow flowers, and those flowers were going to become tomatoes, and you just threw it in the compost bucket like it owed you money. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it's the whole video. Every gardening blog, every extension pamphlet, every guy at the nursery with a flannel shirt and strong opinions has told you the same thing. Prune your tomatoes. Cut the suckers. Train it to a single leader. Here's the problem. Almost none of that is true for the tomato plant sitting in your backyard. It's true for a plant grown in a climate-controlled greenhouse, trained up a string 20 feet in the air, by a commercial operation that cares about vertical real estate, not your dinner. You are not that operation, and your tomato plant did not agree to those terms. Today, we are going to look at actual plant biology, roots, sunburn, energy, and disease. By the end of this, you'll understand why leaving your plants alone is usually the higher-yielding, lower-labor, more resilient way to grow a tomato. And, because I'm not trying to start a cult here, we'll also cover the exact situations where pruning does make sense and how to tell the difference. Let's get into it. Let's start with a question nobody asks. Why do we prune tomatoes in the first place? Who decided this was the correct way? The honest answer is, commercial greenhouse growers decided this, for commercial greenhouse reasons. In a high-density greenhouse, every square foot costs money. To maximize profit, growers train each tomato up a single vertical string. Every sucker is lateral growth competing for a vertical slot that could hold another whole plant. In that context, pruning to a single stem is just real estate math. It has nothing to do with making the tomato healthier. It has to do with square footage. Think of it like an apartment building in a crowded city. If every tenant suddenly demanded a sprawling backyard, the developer would run out of room instantly. Greenhouse growers aren't trying to grow the happiest tomato plants. They're trying to grow the most profitable ones per square meter. But somewhere along the way, that industrial real estate math escaped the greenhouse, found its way into home garden advice, and became a universal law. Nobody stopped to ask, does a home gardener, with actual dirt, actual space, and no landlord charging by the square inch, need to do this? For determinate, or bush, varieties, the answer is incredibly simple. Do not touch them. They are genetically hardwired to grow to a set size, set one massive flush of fruit, and stop. Every sucker you pinch off is a flower cluster you are never getting back. Pruning a bush tomato doesn't help it. It just gives you fewer tomatoes, full stop. But for indeterminate tomatoes, the vining kind that grow until frost kills them, the story is a little more interesting. These are the ones we mutilate for their own good. And as it turns out, we've been completely misinterpreting what a sucker actually is. A sucker is the shoot that grows out of the crotch between the main stem and a leaf branch. Every instruction manual tells you to pinch these off early so the plant can focus its energy on the main stem. But biologically, a sucker is not a parasite. It is a second trunk. If you leave it alone, it grows its own leaves, its own flowers, and its own fruit. Left entirely to its own devices, a single tomato seed doesn't grow one skinny vine with a few fruit on it. It grows an entire bush, 5, 6, 10 productive stems, each one independently capable of ripening a full cluster of fruit. So when you pinch off a sucker, you aren't helping the plant redirect energy. You are amputating a future branch before it has a chance to exist. This brings us to the single biggest myth in tomato growing, and I want to say this very slowly. Pruning does not focus the plant's energy into the remaining fruit. That phrase gets repeated so often it sounds like science. It isn't. Imagine you own a bakery. Every oven inside that bakery bakes bread. Now imagine some guy in a flannel shirt walks in, turns off half your ovens and says, "Don't worry, this will focus the bakery's energy so the remaining ovens work harder." You'd throw a stale baguette at him. But that is exactly what we do to our tomatoes. Sugars and carbohydrates, through photosynthesis, in its leaves. Leaves are the source. Fruit and roots are the sinks that use that sugar. The amount of sugar a plant can make is directly tied to how much leaf surface it has soaking up sunlight. When you prune a sucker, you aren't removing a competitor for the fruit's energy. You are shutting down a section of the power plant and calling it efficiency. And it gets worse. Sugar movement inside a tomato plant is surprisingly local. The leaves closest to a given fruit cluster are the primary suppliers of sugar to that specific cluster. So when you open up the plant by stripping interior leaves, you aren't helping. You are starving the exact fruit clusters sitting right next to those leaves. You reach in, grab a handful of leaves to tidy things up, and the tomatoes closest to that spot pay the price. All right, philosophy is nice, but let's talk numbers. Because numbers are where this myth completely falls apart. There's a long-term trial out of Purdue University that compared pruned and unpruned indeterminate tomatoes directly. The pruned plants, the ones with their suckers removed, did produce bigger individual tomatoes. About 25% bigger by mass. Sounds like a win, right? Except the unpruned plants, left completely alone, produced 38% more total tomato weight over the season. You traded a slightly larger tomato for significantly fewer tomatoes, and you lost the math. Now, I could read off 40 other percentages from 50 different academic papers, but that is going to put us both to sleep. Instead, look at this. Every single study tells us the same thing. Pruning trades quantity for a modest bump in individual size. If your life's goal is to win a blue ribbon for one giant tomato at the county fair, by all means, prune hard. But if your goal is, I would like a reasonable pile of tomatoes for sauce, salsa, and sandwiches all summer, pruning is actively working against you. I want to pause here and be fair, because plenty of experienced gardeners will tell you pruning saved their harvest, and I believe them. Sometimes it does. Maybe they let a plant go wild, and it grew into a massive green jungle but never set fruit. The next season, they pruned, and boom, tomatoes. That is a real result, but before we turn that into a permanent rule, we need to understand why it happened. And to do that, we have to look at the half of the plant we can't see. A plant is one single connected system. What happens above the soil directly controls what happens below it. When you chop off a plant's leaves, its root growth rate drops. This isn't a minor side effect. It's a biological rule. If you remove leaf area, the plant stops expanding its roots and redirects all its stored sugars to rebuild the missing canopy. Why should you care? Because a shallow, stunted root system is a plant that panics during a dry spell. When a tomato's roots can't reach deep moisture during a hot summer day, it produces a hormone called abscisic acid. This hormone travels up to the leaves and forces the plant's breathing pores, the stomata, to slam shut. That saves water, sure, but it also cuts off the plant's carbon dioxide supply, which halts photosynthesis. So now you have a plant that is stressed, growing slower, and making less sugar. And the first domino in that chain was you, standing there with pruning shears, stopping the roots from growing properly. An unpruned plant keeps its massive leaf canopy, keeps feeding sugars down to its roots, and builds a deep, resilient root system that can go find water on its own. It shrugs off a dry week, while the pruned plant is having a metabolic crisis. Let's talk about Sunscald. Yes, tomatoes can get sunburned. When people tell you to open up the canopy to let more light in, they are removing the plant's own sunshade. Tomato fruit sitting in direct, intense afternoon sun for hours will develop these pale, leathery patches. They aren't just ugly. These patches are direct entry points for secondary fungal rot. Ironically, gardeners often prune to prevent disease and end up creating a sunburned wound that invites disease right in. A full, unpruned leaf canopy acts like a natural, adjustable, zero-cost umbrella. The fruit stays cool, stays shaded, and stays healthy. Some growers try to solve this with Missouri pruning, where you pinch off just the tip of a sucker, but leave its leaves to shade the fruit. It works, but it is basically extra homework to partially solve a problem you created by pruning in the first place. Now, let's address the strongest argument the pro-pruning crowd has: airflow and disease. Fungal diseases like early blight and septoria leaf spot love warm, humid, stagnant air trapped inside a dense tomato canopy. Keeping leaves dry is a legitimate defense. But pruning has its own disease tax. Every single pinch, cut, or snap is an open wound. If it's humid or about to rain, that open wound is a welcome mat for fungal spores, bacteria, and virus-carrying insects. And when researchers put pruned and unpruned rows side by side in real field trials, both groups got hit by septoria leaf spot at the exact same rate, with the exact same severity. Pruning didn't save them. If you actually want to stop fungal diseases, you don't need to cut your plant. You just need to change two things. First, use the parking car rule. Space your plants 3 to 4 feet apart. If every car has enough room, nobody has trouble getting out. Spacing allows wind to dry the entire plant naturally, without you needing to make a single cut. Second, mulch heavily. Lay down straw or mulched leaves. Most fungal spores live in the soil. When rain hits bare dirt, it splashes those spores onto the lowest leaves. A thick layer of straw acts like a shield, trapping the spores underground. Do those two things, and you've solved the actual root cause of fungal disease without ever wounding your plant. So, when does pruning actually make sense? Because this isn't a scam, it's a tool. But like any tool, you need to know what problem you're solving before you use it. There are only 5 legitimate reasons to prune a tomato. 1. You made a spacing mistake. If you planted your tomatoes 18 inches apart in a small bed, they are going to turn into an impenetrable jungle. Pruning is a reasonable way to manage a mistake you already made. Next year, just plant them farther apart. 2. Aesthetics. If you want a tidy, manicured garden because that fits your vibe, go for it. Just be honest that it's a style choice, not a yield-boosting strategy. 3. Portion control. A fully unpruned, healthy, indeterminate tomato can produce an overwhelming amount of fruit. If your biggest worry is being buried in tomatoes, pruning is a great way to put the brakes on production. 4. Severe, localized disease history. If you live in a swampy, high-humidity climate and have tried spacing and mulching, selective bottom pruning can be used as a last resort. 5. An incredibly short growing season. If your first frost is weeks away, pinching off new flowers and tiny suckers encourages the plant to finish ripening the fruit it already has, instead of wasting energy on growth that will just freeze. Before you make a cut, ask yourself, what specific problem am I solving? If your answer is, because a guy on the internet told me to, put the shears down. If you want to try the unpruned approach this season, the setup is incredibly simple. First, give them space, 3 to 4 feet minimum. Second, mulch heavy. Put down 6 to 8 inches of straw right at planting. Third, support the plant. Don't fight it. Toss out those flimsy, cone-shaped store cages. Build a cage out of concrete reinforcing wire or a cattle panel. You aren't trying to tie the plant to a leash. You are just giving its heavy branches a sturdy shoulder to lean on. And finally, and this is the hardest part for most gardeners, get out of its way. We love to feel productive. We want to check, adjust, prune, and tinker every single afternoon. But sometimes, the best thing you can do for a plant is absolutely nothing. Tomatoes have been growing themselves quite successfully for a few million years. They don't need your supervision. A tomato sucker isn't a threat to your harvest. It is your harvest, still folded up in miniature, waiting for you to leave it alone. Pruning isn't wrong. It's just a specific tool for specific problems like spacing, style, or portion control. If you can't name the problem you're solving, you're just trading tomatoes for tradition. Give them space, give them mulch, give them a cage they can lean on, and let them do what they were born to do. If this video saved you from pinching off a single sucker this season, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one, hopefully buried in tomatoes.